And I'm really excited today to have Wendy Pease as our speaker. This topic, I think, doesn't get enough attention, this multilingual aspect to business. I think many of us are missing a big opportunity here, as I believe that we'll hear. Wendy Pease is owner of a company called Rapport International. It's a translation and interpretation company. And she's been in business since 1987. She's seasoned and experienced and has a lot of experience and knowledge about international marketing. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Wendy. If you'd like to expand on that intro, please do. But I just am excited to hear your presentation.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I'm glad to see a lot of you I already know. Iris was in my growth group, and Elena and I have had a chance to talk. And even though we do similar things, very different businesses. So, and Deb, I met you a year ago when you were just starting out. So it's fun to see you all. And the company was started in 1987. I bought it in 2004. So I could be that old, but I haven't owned it that long. Okay, so I thought I'd start out just to show some marketing goofs that happen if you don't test your brand name or you're not hiring the right person for translation. So Barf didn't work in Iran, and Pinto didn't work in Brazil, even though it was a fine name for a car here, regardless of the car trouble. KFC had some troubles with their tagline. Coors had a problem when they went down to Spanish-speaking countries. German, you don't want to talk about puffs. I just learned that knob is not a good word to use in English in the UK. So if you're writing a user manual, sorry, I shouldn't have that phone next to me. If you're writing a manual in the UK, you want to use the lever, not the knob. So you can look that up if you want to figure out what it is. Okay, so avoiding mistakes can help win you business. This is what we're going to talk about today: the scope and potential of language translation, the business it could bring you, terminology that's used in the industry, so we're talking about the same things. Even if you have no interest in exporting to other countries, looking at the opportunities in the US, I'm going to go through some case studies that will highlight why you want to use a good translation agency and not Google Translate or just machine translation for a lot of your things. And then we'll look at how you develop a translation management plan to work with your global communications or your multilingual communications. So the first thing is just to narrow down the languages. There are 3,000 languages in the world. There's actually becoming fewer and fewer languages because as we globalize and people who are speaking a language that's not as prevalent, they're learning the other language that might be more spoken around them. So to function in their area, they're becoming bilingual. Plus, you have TV that's coming in, so you're getting more exposure to the more current languages. So nobody would ever translate into 3,000 languages. And if you look at the large companies, a lot of them are doing one of the following 12 languages, because that's targeting 60% of the world. So why translate? So often I hear, well, English is the global language. Why do we need to translate our materials? Because, people will accept it in English only. Well, all the research is showing that people do want to talk in their native language. They're more likely to buy, and they're willing to pay more money. And more than half of consumers are willing to pay more if you're giving them information in their own language. People tend to visit websites in their own language, so even if you have a product that is more applicable to what they're doing, if you're not putting it in their language, they're not looking at it. And you can see down at the bottom, 42% says they never purchase products in other languages. And we've had feedback from clients on this when they go over. We had a company go over to Korea and make a presentation, a sales pitch. And they said that they ended up winning the presentation just because, or winning the project because they were the only company that came in and had translated their presentation into Korean. So even though it was delivered in English, they took the time to do their presentation into the language that people knew. Okay, so terminology. The first thing to know is that translation refers to written language, and interpretation refers to spoken. So it's like nails on a chalkboard when I'm watching the news and it'll say the president's translator said, because that would be an interpreter because they're interpreting live spoken conversation. So that's the first thing to know. And then you have different qualities of translation. So the technologies that we're using in the industry now are machine translation. It's great for a quick and dirty or getting the gist of something. So say you get an email and you're trying to figure out if it's really pertinent to your business, pop it in Google Translate and you can see if it really is something important that you need to pay attention to or whether it's a junk email coming in. There's some companies, and they scared the bejesus out of me because they were coming out at prices that were so low. And I'm like, how are they doing this? Well, it ends up they're sending it out like an Uber model where anybody who's online can pick it up and translate it. So it's, it's a step above machine translation where you get, no human involvement, but you don't know the qualities of the people that are doing it. And you're not getting anything consistent because if you have a marketing message that you're trying to get across, you're trying to repeat it the same way with the same terminology. If you have the crowd translate it, they could say dinner or they could say supper. Those are two words we use interchangeably in English. And the other thing about crowd translation to be very careful of is it's not confidential. Everything goes out on the web. So when you start looking at, the GDPR and HIPAA laws and privacy and company secrets, you've lost all that. Translation memory is a software that we use because we can leverage already done translations. So it makes it cheaper for you and it helps keep that consistency of voice. And so, for example, we had a client, and this happened years ago. They've been with us for over 25 years, since before I bought the company. And they had us do all their products. The company's now Tomy, but they do the Thomas the Tank, Thomas the Train, and Bob the Builder stuff. And so a bunch of those kind of toys. And so we had translated all the names for it. And then before I was around, they went out and they said, okay, we need our sales catalog done. And they shopped it on price. They got the catalog done by somebody besides us. And when the salespeople had the catalog at the conference, they couldn't figure out what anything was because the names in the catalog didn't match what the names were on the product. So translation memory wasn't around at the time, so that would solve that problem, bring the price down because it's already been translated. But you do want to keep consistency of voice when you're doing your translation. Then you get into words that are thrown around a lot more. Globalization would be one Spanish, I'm going to jump around on these, would be one Spanish that you want to use for the world. So, Iris, you're from Puerto Rico. You have Puerto Rican Spanish, and that can be used in Puerto Rico. Now, if you're looking at other parts of the Spanish world, depending on who you're targeting, you might be able to get away with Puerto Rican Spanish that you're doing. Spanish, we'd often recommend somebody from South America or for Spain, because Puerto Rico and Mexican Spanish are much more anglicized and Americanized because of the close relationship with the United States. But if you have a certain product, like if you have an industrial product that the users are, it's very technical writing, then you could certainly globalize and do one Spanish translation that would go across the world. Localization is where you really make it local. So if you've got a consumer product that you're launching in Puerto Rico, Argentina, and Spain, all of a sudden, you know, I see this a lot with like sneakers. If you've got a New Balance shoe, they're going to pick up athletes that are famous in those locations. They're going to put the currency that is there. They're going to use local references that make sense. So when you hear about localization, that's really bringing it down to a certain level. Cultural adaptation. Did anybody hear about the international dinner goof with Netanyahu serving dinner in a shoe? I mean, dessert in a shoe? No? Okay, I'll send you the link to that, Ellen. You can distribute it afterwards. He had, I can't remember where the visitors were from, but a shoe, where was that? A shoe in most countries, it was Japan. They had Japanese visitors in, had this high-end chef that's known around the world, and he served these bonbons in a shoe. And in the Japanese culture, you'd never wear shoes in the house. You take them off at the door, they're dirty, you don't bring the germs in. So putting something like a shoe with food in it was just disgusting. So it's gone all over the internet for culture. So you can see that with food, you can see that with pictures. I can put up pictures of people who are not from the United States, and even though we have a lot of different colors and looks from the United States, you can almost tell when somebody's international from food choices, expressions, and that. So when you're using pictures, slang, references, that would be cultural adaptation. Transcreation is when you're creating it fresh. You might take, you know, we're going to do this for the English-speaking community, but we're going to go off to a German-speaking agency in German to create a whole new message, a whole new, you know, picture, verbalization, packaging that's going to go off just to that market. Transliteration is really never used. That's taking the word for word translation. It's not the meaning. A good translation is actually going to take the meaning and get it across. Okay, spoken interpretation, we offer all these. There's telephone interpreting where you get somebody on the phone and they just repeat what you say. There's video remote where then you can work with a video. There's consecutive interpreting where, you know, we sit in a room together. There's certain positioning, there's certain ethics, there's certain ways of handling things, but each person talks and then the interpreter repeats it. And then there's conference interpreting where you think about the UN, where they're doing simultaneous, somebody speaking and they're just speaking it at the same time. Okay, so we've got the terminology down. And most people, when they think of multilingual marketing, they think about exporting. And if you're from the United States, it scares the bejesus out of you because you got to go international, you got to speak other languages, you got other cultures, and most people are afraid. Well, there's nothing to be afraid of because the US does have so many cultures. And even if you don't want to get into exporting, there's a huge market in the US. There are 50 million Spanish speakers in the US, and that market, you know, and these are the other top languages that are in there. So if you're in a community that has these, there are some things you can do in your business to bring new markets in. So let's just look at the Spanish. It's the second largest Spanish-speaking market in the world. After Mexico, we have more Spanish speakers here. And rather than the olden days where people came in and tried to get rid of their language and their culture, people are embracing their culture now. There's more second-generation Latinos speaking Spanish at home, watching Spanish-speaking TV. And so they're really taking information in Spanish as well as functioning in the English-speaking world. These marketers get it. If you go to Spanish-speaking TV, if you pick up a Spanish newspaper, magazine, you go on the websites. These are the companies that are already marketing to other languages in the United States. So the potential is huge. Okay, so let me take you through some case studies to show some of the kinds of things that come in, and explain why working with a good translation partner is very important. So Staples decided to redo their tagline, and this is a project we work with them, and they wanted to bookend make something happen. So make work-life balance happen. Make refrigerator-worthy art masterpieces happen. And so it's more than just taking the words and translating them, because we couldn't get the bookends in the other languages. So we had to play around with how does the message get across that it can be consistent and still work that way. So that was one thing that we ran into. The second thing that we ran into is the French translator came back and said, refrigerator-worthy art masterpieces? What's that? You know, in a lot of places, refrigerator, you know, things have a single usage. So on their refrigerator, they keep it clean. They wouldn't put their kids' artwork on like we do in the United States to showcase them. So that's a cultural adaptation where that just doesn't work. So we had to either eliminate that one from usage, or, and I think we just said that that's not going to work, and we didn't come up with something else. Here's another one. Tomi, I talked about earlier. They have this product here in the United States. It's called Take and Toss. They're plastic containers that you can either, they're cheap enough that you can use them and throw them away if you're out at a picnic, but they're solid enough where you could actually wash them and reuse them. So they launched this product a few years back over in Europe, and it confused people. They weren't buying it because they couldn't figure out, well, is this something that I reuse, or is this something that I have to throw out? So they came back and they said, okay, we want to rebrand, we want to give this a different name. We want to rebrand it. So they came up with Sava, S-A-V-A, with the 2 dots over the A, and to make it look more European, kind of keep the theme of what's here, but not so much in your face about take and toss. So what we did was we went out and we tested the Sava name across different cultures, different translators, to see if it had any negative connotation or meanings like the Nova or the Pinto or any of the other things that ran into. And it got a really good response. So they relaunched the product over there, and it's done very well. We work with Tufts Health Plan, and they wanted an internal review outside the agency to review any work that we did for them. And their internal Spanish-speaking folks were getting too busy, so they took it over to their, I'm just watching time, Ellen. So what time do you want me to wrap up at about 10, 15 minutes? You can nod your head or shake your head. Okay. So they took it over to their creative firm to have them proof it. And the creative firm was making some very big changes that changed the message. So we got back, and our translator was doing the final review, and he's like, you know, this changes the message. This is what we want to say. So it was more than an edit, and we certify our material for them, and we carry a Lloyd's of London liability insurance policy for, you know, any liability. We've never had to access it in 30 years. But we said we can't certify it because this isn't a translation that we've done. They've now changed the message. And so we had to discuss with them whether it was a proof or whether they really wanted to add their creative flair to it. So we worked through that and decided that they really wanted, they came back that they wanted a certified translation for their internal documentation. So we had to figure out how it was going to be edited and train that so we could give the final proof and still certify it. So, and these are the types of conversations that you want to have, particularly in marketing translation. Here's another one. I love this example. Xeros is a company that was expanding internationally. They got a distributor. They came back and they said, these translations are trash. So when I first started in the company, I would get panicked about this. I'm like, what do you mean they're trash? No, I know the translators and I know how good they are and I know who we work with. So when I hear that, I go, okay, well, let's figure out what it is. You either track changes and send it in, or we have a phone conversation about it. And oftentimes it's just personal preferences. So on this one, it was a salesperson whose English wasn't as fluent, and he wanted something very sales oriented. So he was changing the marketing message to something that was sales. And if you know the difference between marketing and sales, marketing always has the benefits message, and sales is always, they're very conscious of price, because that's, where they lose deals if they don't differentiate themselves. So all in all, when it came back to it, our translations were approved. Now, in this situation, it happened. There are some times where the internal reviewers will have an industry terminology that they've used before, or that they have a preference, and the translator will go, yeah, that's fine. It's just a dinner supper type word. So we always want to hear back as to about the quality, and anybody you work with should too. I put this one in here because there is free export assistance for small businesses. The states and the federal government, through the Department of Commerce, will provide some free consulting. They will provide introductions to companies around the world. And Iris, if you're thinking about going international, we can find introductions for you in the Department of Commerce. And they also have these STEP grants, which is, if you write an application, you can get free money. And one of the things that it can be used for is translation, but it also can be used for developing marketing materials, doing a trade show, anything that's going to help you do business internationally. So Comtus had an English-only website, started getting inquiries from countries in different languages, came to us for translation, and really saw their business grow. So when it all started, I was giving a seminar up at New Hampshire International Trade Resource Center. He learned about the STEP grant, he got some money, and then he's like in 14 countries now or something like that. So it's been a real good success story. Okay, so how do you start? You hear about all this, you need to have somebody good. You're thinking about going internationally, so what do? The first is you have your growth plan, you have your strategy, what are you going to do as a company? Then you come down into your communication strategy, and this is where this loop starts. As you come into the communication strategy, you say, okay, whatever I'm going to do has to support my corporate strategy. Then once you've figured out where you're going, when, what you're going to translate, how you're going to service them, sitting it at a strategy level, you look at technology. So we've talked about translation memory. You also want to look at, do you need API connectors? Do you need automatic web alerts to update your website? Do you need a portal? Or do you just want to do it the old-fashioned way with send it in over email, you get it back, and you use it that way? So there's so many options now to leverage technology and process. Who's responsible for it? Who's your direct connection? We've worked with a lot of companies to say, they start out and there's a lot of connection between us at the beginning where we're talking, and now we're like their, translation department, just stuff comes in, stuff goes out. And then you have to think about quality. I mentioned Google Translate, and if you get an email that you just want to translate. So yes, this is the one that I wanted to show you. This should link us in to a website. I'll probably shoot my, oh no, here goes. Okay, so this organization contacted us, and they provide day programs for handicapped people. And they contacted us for brochures to be translated. And when they got the quote back with all the layout and everything that needed to be done, they're like, no, it's too expensive. So then they get back over to us and they say, well, we want our website done. So I go to the website, and you can see through here, it's loaded with information. So for us to quote that was going to take quite a while, and I knew they weren't going to go for it because they were on a limited budget. So what I said to them was, let's talk. Let's come up with a strategy. Why do you want to translate? And they said, well, we service people and families who speak Spanish and Portuguese, and we'd like to have some information for them. Plus, we get audited. And so we need to show that we're providing in-language services. I said, okay, then let's narrow it down. So we went back to the website and we looked at it and we said, okay, you need something about us. You need what services you apply, where you're located. And then I said, and people who speak other languages donate at the same percentages, they have research on this, that other people do, and they give to things organizations they feel passionate about. So they put a donate us page on there. So I said, okay, pull off the copy that you want, because I can't do that for you. That's a decision you have to make. Get it over to us in a Word document, and we'll quote that. And so looking at the technology, we have other companies that have their website notifies us when they add a new blog, so we can translate and add that right back up for them. They weren't going to do that. All they wanted to do was get the translation so their web developer could load it up. It was limited text, and then they could use the translation to come up with a brochure or handouts that they could give there. And they needed very high quality to show for their audit. So this went from an expensive project that I can't do, but I'm going to be liable for, to now having a multilingual website, multilingual brochures, and something very affordable for a community organization that didn't have the budget to do anything. So there's lots of ways. There's landing pages, there's automatic alerts, there's starting with one language, there's lots of different ways you can do, but it all has to lead back to what your corporate strategy is and where you're going to pay attention. Then the next question, I made this a messy slide because handling client service can feel messy in this, but you can boil it down. With chats and emails, you can use Google Translate to see what's coming in. You could probably at the start get away with Google Translate to reply to people, but as you're building the types of questions that come in, you're popping it in a Word document, and then you're coming up with your responses so you can get that translated, and you can have an automatic chat response, or you have email that you can, already drafted email, you can just reply. Telephone interpreting, it's cheap money. It's $1.35 per minute. There's no monthly fees. There's no sign-up fees. It's just the time you use. So if you do have somebody on the phone, you speak a different language, you call up the access number, you give your code, you get somebody to help facilitate the conversation. And then if you have meetings or trainings, you can pull in a live interpreter. It's going to cost you more, but the communication is facilitated. But I love the website. I mean, all these questions you can answer right on the website. You can get it translated, and then you're using it over and over again. So there's lots of simple ways to get into this to really service clients. All right, so that focused on US and how you'd go about looking at it. Now let's open that door to exporting. All the studies show that companies that export do better. They have higher sales, more people that make more money, and they're producing more. They've got natural resiliency when an economy is going through a depression or recession because they're in the global markets. If the dollar becomes weak, products from here become more accessible and demanded internationally. So there's so many benefits to doing it, and there's so many free resources too. I put Mass Export here because that's our local one in Massachusetts, but just about every state has an export center where you can go to for help. If you're interested in knowing where they are, let me know. I can send you a list. The Department of Commerce, there's a lot of resources there. They do webinars, they do trainings, they set up meetings for people, and the local state offices work closely with the Department of Commerce. Getting to Global is an organization that's started to bring all the different suppliers and government resources into one portal so you can easily access it. There's compliance, there's Ex-Im Bank, and all the consultants that are doing international work I mean, I can't say all, I say a lot of the good ones know each other so they can introduce you across. Like if you need shipping, international shipping, if you need international ways to accept payments, if you need compliance, I've got, connections with all those sorts of people that can answer any of the questions that you need. And we offer free consulting, so definitely contact me. All right, so where are my 6 keys for success that I recommend to you? One is to just do it, add it into your corporate strategy, and then work to come up with how to do it. The internet's beautiful because you can try it. There's free resources to get connected with people that either have already done it, are doing it, or know how to do it. Develop your communications plan. Cultural intelligence is just about asking questions and being aware. But if you're going to another country or you're working with another culture, call me. I can definitely connect you with people or give you some advice. And then repeat. I mean, the word on the street is, particularly in the technology industry these days, is launch it broken and then fix it live. But the potential is huge. So here's my contact information. Ellen also has it. Love to take any questions if people have them.
Yeah, you guys can unmute if you have any questions. I loved hearing the opportunities, Wendy, that may be hidden. They're like right in front of us, but also hidden in some ways. We might not see them. Just with the vast amount of people that are bilingual or speak another language.
Yeah. Yeah, there's tremendous opportunity in the U.S. And once you start paying attention to it, like if you go home tonight and turn on Univision and look at Spanish TV, you'd be shocked at the number of companies that are advertising in Spanish-speaking TV. I get a kick out of watching the Olympics. I'll switch from the English to the Spanish TV, and I watch how they might adapt their ads for the different audiences, but they're the same companies.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I liked too how you were talking about the quality of translation, because we've all kind of chuckled at bad translation into English. But we certainly don't want our companies doing that into another language.
Yes, and that's marketing people often feel like they can't control quality, but there's a lot of things that you can build into the process to make sure you get a good quality.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly work with people on that.
I do notice, great presentation, Wendy, but I do notice, because my family is Spanish speaking, but growing up, my stepfather was American, and so we never spoke Spanish in the house. And so I learned some Spanish as growing up because my family would speak Spanish, but I'm not fluent in Spanish. And so being in Miami and having a business, and most of the people that work for me speak Spanish, I have been, practicing more. But when I go into the Google Translator, I'm like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be said. Like, I know that it's not right. So I wonder, like, who is writing this stuff? So that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, they've built an algorithm for Google Translate, where what it'll do is it's picking up all the segments and matching them, and it's more like a transliteration. It's a word for word. But if you put any colloquialisms, like, if you say I have goosebumps, goosebumps. In Italian, it's called chicken skin. It's not going to be smart enough to know to change the words to get the meaning across.
Right. And then the other question I had for you was, I never really thought, to be honest, about this. And like with my business where we actually manufacture, I do ship and I do other homes that are not local, but it's out of state. It hasn't been internationally. So with like window treatments and draperies and things like that, I do notice that there's a lot of companies like the Shade Store or different like Ethan Allen's that, do other things. But I feel like it's in my industry, it's always been locally. I don't know that it's international. So how would I do some more research about something like that?
Well, first off, I would start with local. Like, how do you get your clients?
Well, it's all been word of mouth. So what happens is my interior designers that I work with, they would have their clients here, or they have clients in New York, or I had one in Toronto, for instance. And so they, when I was working, like for the Toronto one, I was working with a client here, and her daughter, she's from Canada, and her daughter would come here and loved like what we were doing, and then wanted me to work with her on her home in Canada. And so we did everything here. I had someone there in the area measure and handle the installation for me. And that's some of the features that I get with being a dealer with Hunter Douglas, who's the manufacturer and leader in our blind industry. And so what we did is we actually trucked it and shipped it that way. But I've also done, things in Bermuda or like the Bahamas where we've had to ship them through containers, or they've been brought on the plane. And so that's only been with clients that I work with here or that know of me through here. And so I have never really gone out and advertised internationally and never thought about that. And so that's why I guess it would probably be designers that I would have to connect with in other countries, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what my market is. But I don't know like where they would think that they would need the use. That's kind of where I struggle.
Okay, so first off, you've done a lot of word of mouth. It seems like your market comes through the designers. So thinking about, I speak with another guy, Ed, who does, he actually might be a good connection for you, because he works with manufacturers on how to develop a social media strategy, because your word of mouth you have really good, and you can leverage that on and then take it to social media. And then your social media, you could then translate that. But I see a huge opportunity for doing that in Spanish and maybe French for reaching the Canadian market and going North America first. But right where you are in Miami, and then picking up any, designers in the other Spanish-speaking communities around the U.S., and then reaching out to Puerto Rico and Mexico would be your first way to go, since you've already got familiarity with Spanish and you'd be able to talk and facilitate the conversation. But I think the first is to come up with a social media plan to target designers. And once you get that up and going, do it in Spanish too.
Okay, I do have social media outlets that I work with, but not in Spanish. So who's the guy that you said I should talk to? Ed, what's his last name?
Ed, oh my gosh.
Or is he in your cohort?
No, he's not in my cohort, but let's connect afterwards, because if you have social media going, I can look at what that's going on with, but I'll definitely connect you. Isn't that funny? I talk to him all the time, and I'm just drawing a blank on his name right now. I hate that.
Okay, I'll reach out to you, and then we'll connect, and that would be great.
Yeah, because he might be able, because where he comes in, when we speak together, he talks about the social media plan and the ways that you can develop that, and then I talk about putting the other language around it.
Perfect. Wendy, thank you so much. It's been very
Sure, and Leslie, you and Iris might want to connect, because Iris has the shipping company.
Yes, actually, great idea, Iris.
Yeah.
Connect. Iris, too, in your chat, put your contact info so I can write it down, please.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be some cross-referral opportunities there.
So Leslie, this is Sheila from New York. I'm an immigration from China.
Yeah.
I know not an English speaker, let's say when we do house renovation or when we go to doctors, we want to find out the good quality of service provider. And English major, business like you think English is good enough for you to advertise in your company, right? But when I make my family decision, if there is a native language presentation to help me understand the business they provide in America, I will go with that, because that's so easy for me to understand them quickly than understand in English. I don't know whether this, when I look for a good interior designer, if there's any English, Mandarin speaker, I won't ignore them. I will try to understand their service level to adjust whether they are good quality, their service I needed. Even though at the end, I may sign up the contract in English, but if I know they can communicate in my native language, it helps me to make my purchase decision.
Yeah.
That's the point I want to tell you. So if your people can speak Spanish, you may want to do the Spanish language presentation, just like a different language option on the website.
Right.
It may help.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that goes back to, now imagine, Leslie, if you hired a Chinese speaking designer, you've got a beautiful road into people. And I've seen this with accountants, insurance brokers, real estate agents, anybody who can function in the two language world. Like Sheila said, just because it's going to be easier for me to speak, I'm more apt to hire that person.
Right. And I actually experienced that with Portuguese too, because I had a client that was referred to me that spoke Portuguese, but English as well. And then she referred a lot of people that were Portuguese to me. And there was one that wasn't as fluent in English. So it was a little bit harder for us to communicate. We did manage, but it would have been much easier if I had some help with that.
Yeah, and if the client's really worth it, then you think about telephone interpreting, because you could, no matter where you are, just dial into your access code and they'd help facilitate the conversation.
Yeah, I had never thought about that. I never knew the sources for that. So that's something that I can contact you for as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if you don't use it, the account just sits there. You don't pay anything for it. It's just the minutes that you're using. Yeah.
Good to have it for the just in case. Okay, good.
Right. Yeah. So then if you start targeting the boutique hotels, I mean, would they be through designers or would you go direct to them?
Well, I'm finding with the hospitality that I definitely need to connect more with hotel owners and the property management of the hotels, whether it's a purchasing company or the management itself. So yeah, I some designers, that most of the designers, I should say, they specify they don't actually do the purchasing or the ordering for the hospitality. So it's a little bit of a different market, but yeah. Designers still would be a great source though, because they would be the ones to know who I need to connect with, or they could source my services.
But that's the other thing I'm thinking about. If you're going direct to the boutique hotels, they've got to have international organizations that are part of that. Right. And then no matter where they are, that's a real good target market. And you get in that network, then they're going to be sharing your name.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Interesting. A lot to think about.
Yeah, there is, but again, it's just like making a plan. And I've seen so many examples that, if you're ready to move on it, call, and I love helping companies figure it out.
Thank you very much. I definitely will talk to you more about that.
Yeah. Is Kathy still on the phone? No. Okay.
Wendy, I had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One, you were talking about the website, and if you were to do a translation in your website, like how does it live on your website? Is it a tab, and how does that work for like search engine optimization? Or is it hosted separately on a separate site?
It depends on how you want to do it. Kind of the first step is that you put the little flag or language up in the top right-hand corner, because that's normally where people would go to look on it. And then when they click on that, that can be a separate landing page, or it can take them into a whole mirrored image of your original site. Progressively, like if you're a large multinational company and you have a whole marketing and, you know, website department, you might even develop it with, rather than having the .com after it, you'd have the, like, I think China is at CN, you know, so you might have your own IP. But for right now, when you're starting out, you just put the click up top and it goes to a different landing page or a mirrored image. And that's something we can work. We can either do it for you and make recommendations, or we can work with your web developer to figure out the best way to do it.
And then how does it live in Google in that other country? Will it be translated by virtue of it being a translated site? Will it show up that way? Because I mean, I know we get contacts internationally, and I don't know how it lives elsewhere.
Yeah, it would live in Google, and then we can work with you to optimize it across any local search engines that might be, you know, more relevant in those places. And we're going to want to work on your search phrases or keywords to make sure that they actually line up with what the local people are searching for. So you want to, you know, so whoever's translating it wouldn't just translate it, but do a little bit more research on, okay, is this the appropriate keyword that you want to go after? And then you're going to want to keep using that.
Really interesting. Thank you. And then I also wanted to ask you about mass export and the Department of Commerce, how you go about working with them to find opportunities.
Okay, so you're in Massachusetts or New Hampshire?
Massachusetts.
Okay, I knew you were close to me. I just couldn't remember. Yeah, I'll connect you to somebody over at the Mass Export office.
That'd be great.
Paula Murphy is I'm just making a note so I don't forget, is the head of Mass Export over there. So I'll introduce you, and then she'll appoint you to somebody there. They're going to listen to what you have, you know, what your goals are and what you want to do, and then they'll pull in the appropriate Department of Commerce person for you.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and you're in a nice position because your company's the right business size, and you'd be eligible for a STEP grant.
Oh, that's really interesting. No, that's great information. Thank you so much. And your presentation was great. And as an aside, from someone that also gives presentations, I like the way you did testimonials in a way by utilizing the logos of companies that you worked with. I thought that was really nice, showing what you had done for them and having their logos. I thought just was a real strong statement without, you know, doing it in a nice way.
Oh, isn't that funny? Yeah, because I like to, when we come across quirky things or different things that I want people to be aware of, it's hard to talk in generality. So thank you for saying that, because that's the first time I've done it that way.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I mean, instead of just putting Staples, having the Staples logo, I think had more impact. And I just think that was really great from a testimonial point of view.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I thought you were great too, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or anything I can help you with? No?
No, I think that was super. So I'll post the recording. And then I guess the PowerPoint's in the recording, so that's all good. And obviously your contact information.
Yes.
So wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this.
All right, my pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Have a good weekend. Happy Mother's Day, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.